Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unravel the spectacular rise of Tailapa II. This is the story of a man whose sheer, unadulterated ambition completely reshaped a landscape of medieval Indian history. Picture this. We're talking about a seemingly minor, middle-management provincial governor who literally orchestrated the total collapse of a massive, deeply entrenched 200-year-old empire, all to reclaim his family's ancient throne. It's an incredible tale of patience, tactical genius, and honestly, perhaps one of the greatest political maneuvers of the entire medieval era. Right off the bat, let's dive into a highly provocative question. This is the ultimate historical detective story, and it's one that continues to fiercely divide modern scholars even today. Was Tailapa II actually the true, legitimate heir to an ancient throne, leading a glorious royal restoration? Or was this all a brilliant political fabrication, a story designed entirely to legitimize a spectacular usurpation? It's a fascinating mystery, and I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we unravel his incredible journey. Here is exactly how we're going to break this all down today. 1. The ultimate power grab. 2. From vassal to sovereign. 3. The wars of consolidation. 4. The culture and architectural revival. 5. The lineage controversy. And finally 6. The lasting Chalukya legacy. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the ultimate power grab, the fall of the Rashtrakutas. To truly grasp the sheer scale of his accomplishments, we have to look at the seemingly impossible geopolitical odds Tailapa II was up against. The Rashtrakutas, they were the undisputed heavyweights of the Deccan Plateau. They had held absolute power for over 2 centuries, controlling massive armies and vast, wealthy trade networks. But, as history constantly reminds us, empires tend to rot from the inside out. By the early 970s, they were looking incredibly vulnerable. They had just suffered a completely devastating raid by the Paramara king, Chalukya II, who practically sacked their capital city. Now, Tailapa II didn't just rush in blindly while the empire was still strong. No, he was a master of strategic opportunism. He patiently bided his time, waiting for this external shock to cripple the capital. Right when the final Rashtrakuta emperor, Karka II, was desperately struggling to hold together a fractured, panicking court, that's when Tailapa stepped into the chaos. In 973 CE, he overthrew Karka II entirely. He ended a 200-year dynasty in one fell swoop. It was, without a doubt, an absolute masterclass in timing. Moving right along to Section 2, from vassal to sovereign, the rapid ascension. Now, what is truly fascinating here is the sheer velocity of his rise. Let's trace this out. Back in 957 CE, epigraphic records show him simply governing a local province called Badami 1000. He is just a feudatory. You know the drill. He pays his taxes, takes his orders, manages local administrative disputes. He's a subordinate. Fast forward a bit to 973 CE and boom, he overthrows his overlords, violently dismantles the existing hierarchy, and declares formal independence. But his ambition doesn't stop there, not even close. By 995 CE, he is actually capturing and executing the very rival kings, like the incredibly powerful Parmara ruler Vakpote Munja, who inadvertently helped him to power by weakening the Rashtrakutas in the first place. We are literally looking at a man who executed one of the most successful middle management to emperor pipelines in recorded history, taking less than 2 decades to become an absolute imperial powerhouse. So you might be wondering, how exactly did he secure that transition so quickly without plunging the entire region into decades of messy civil war? Well, the answer is remarkably simple. He didn't burn down the old empire's capital. He just moved right in. By occupying Manyakheta, Tailapa II took over their revenue systems, their administrative structures, and their military garrisons overnight. This wasn't some petty, destructive raid. It was a highly calculated decapitation of the state. He made sure the sprawling bureaucracy kept humming along seamlessly, just with his name etched at the very top. By retaining Manyakheta as his centralized capital, he immediately signaled to all the surrounding lords that a permanent, stable, and highly capable Chalukya authority had officially been restored. Let's look at Section 3. Wars of consolidation, securing the Deccan. Taking a throne is incredibly hard, but keeping it, that's an entirely different beast. This period of his reign was defined by intense, multi-front warfare against a swarm of opportunistic neighbors. Up in the north, he faced the Panamaras. Vakpote Munja invaded his territory multiple times, but Tailapa finally outmaneuvered him, ultimately capturing and executing his northern rival. Down south, he was up against the legendary Chola Empire, successfully repelling massive invasions led by none other than Rajaraja I. Despite the sheer might of the Chola war machine, Tailapa thwarted their advances at the decisive Battle of Rada,
And get this, he famously captured 150 war elephants in that battle. That is a staggering prize in medieval warfare. He also forced the rebellious Shilahars into submission on the west coast, extracting tribute, and he walled off the Kalachuris in central India, resisting all their incursions. He was fighting a brutal 360-degree war, delegating capable generals like Barappa to secure his flanks while he personally held the line, and he was winning on absolutely every single front.
Section 4. Culture and Architectural Revival. A Golden Age Dawns. But listen, Tailapa II wasn't just a battlefield tactician. He completely understood that true imperial power requires an enduring cultural foundation. He was a visionary who seeded a vibrant cultural renaissance right across the Deccan Plateau. He became a massive champion of the Kannada language, bringing vernacular literature straight into the royal court, which deeply resonated with the local elite. He personally sponsored the legendary poet Rana. In fact, he actually bestowed upon him the highly prestigious title Kavi Chakravartin, which literally translates to Emperor Among Poets. How cool is that? Religiously, he heavily promoted Shaiva orthodoxy through very generous administrative land grants to priests and temples. And he didn't just fund standard buildings, he sponsored highly innovative architecture. The Kaleshvara Temple at Bagali stands as a perfect example of this era, featuring beautiful, early Visara stylistic choices like these highly polished, lathe-turned pillars. He knew that to legitimize his new empire, he had to make it culturally magnificent. Okay, let's get into the drama in Section 5. The Lineage Controversy. Uncovering the missing link. 220. Just let that number sink in for a second. This is a stark, absolutely unavoidable number. It represents the 220-year gap between the fall of the ancient Badami Chalukyas and Tailapa II's sudden rise to power in 973 CE. When he took the throne, Tailapa boldly claimed he was the direct 7th-generation descendant of that ancient Badami Chalukya royalty who had ruled over 2 centuries prior. The catch? There is a massive, deafening silence in the historical and epigraphic record during this 220-year window. No clear inscriptions, no definitive family trees, just a massive 2-century blank space. And this brings us to the modern scholarly divide. Was he truly ancient royalty, or did he possess the sheer audacity to fake a 2-century family tree? Historians like Sirinath U. Kemoth strongly argue for his legitimate descent. They point to continuous naming conventions passing down through generations and the shared, deep religious patronage of Shaivism that conceptually links Tailapa right back to those ancient kings. But the skeptics? They push back hard. They argue that retrofitting a prestigious pedigree onto a newly founded dynasty was a very, very common medieval political trick. Think about it. If you want rival feudal lords to bow to you, you can't just be the guy who used to manage their taxes yesterday. You have to be ancient, ordained royalty. Skeptics point out the complete lack of unbroken epigraphic proof, suggesting Tailapa likely constructed this entire genealogy out of thin air just to mask his usurpation. So the crucial takeaway here is that whether his ancestry was 100% authentic or a carefully constructed, brilliantly executed medieval fiction, it was an absolute political masterstroke. By framing his violent overthrow of the Rashtrakutas not as an act of treason, but as a glorious, righteous dynastic revival, he was able to seamlessly rally loyalists and fragmented elites directly to his cause. As the historical records demonstrate, perceived ideological continuity mattered far more to the stability of his newly forged empire than a verifiable bloodline or a modern DNA test ever could. He gave the people a compelling narrative of restoration, and honestly, they bought into it completely.
Finally, Section 6, the Chalukya Legacy, summarizing the conqueror.
Before we wrap up our journey today, we really need to crystallize exactly what this enigmatic ruler left behind. Here are 5 spectacular accomplishments you absolutely need to remember. First, against literally all odds, he overthrew the deeply entrenched 200-year-old Rashtrakuta Empire. Second, he miraculously revived the Chalukya dynasty from absolute historical obscurity, again, whether by blood or by sheer political will. Third, he championed classical Kannada literature, eternally elevating the language through his incredible court poet Rana. Fourth, he fundamentally transformed the physical and religious landscape by funding Shaiva temples and breathtaking early Visara architecture. And finally, number 5, he forged a unified, fiercely resilient empire in the Western Deccan that stood tall for another 2 full centuries after his death. All of this brings us right back to our core mystery. These spectacular accomplishments prove how a single, fiercely driven individual can entirely transform a chaotic, fractured region into a highly structured superpower. So I have to ask, does history belong to those with the truest, most verifiable bloodlines,
Or does it actually belong to those with the sheer audacity to claim them, paired with the absolute brilliance to actually build an empire? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Because the life of Tailapa II proves that power ultimately bends to those with the vision and the will to take it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning history.